Hey, good evening, and thank you for joining us again tonight. We appreciate you tuning in and being part of this ongoing class on teaching as Jesus taught. This evening, we're going to be in lesson number 10, and we're going to talk about questions. Last week, we talked about the questions that Jesus used when he talked and when he taught and preached. And today, we're going to look at questions that came to Jesus. And we'll talk a little bit about how he responded to them, but the reaction of what we should have as teachers when questions come our way, and how to generate good questions from those who are in our class or audience that we're actually talking to or teaching. So let's begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll get into the lesson material for today. Our Father, we're so thankful that you've given us Jesus. We know that there's just no possible way that we could ever deserve the goodness and kindness you've shown us. We're asking you, Lord, to be with us and help us to show our appreciation day by day, not only in our coming to you, but in the way we interact with other people. And Father, as we're given opportunities to teach, especially to teach your word, we're praying that you'll help us to be more and more in tune with teaching as Jesus taught, and that we'll learn from his example and try to follow along with that as best we can. Lord, there are a lot of people going through a lot of challenges right now, and I know you know it far better than we do. We've talked to you about it on different occasions. We're just asking you, Lord, to be with those who are struggling right now, those who've lost loved ones, those who are struggling with health issues themselves or with their family and loved ones that they're trying to care for. Those who are suffering mental challenges, psychological challenges from this just going on and on and on. We're thankful, Lord, that we were able to meet last week and start meeting again, even in this unique kind of fashion of inside and outside. Asking for your blessings on us as a congregation, that you'll help us to bond together, tie our hearts and minds and our actions together so that we can show our love for each other and for you. And Lord, please throw open the doors for us to reach other people. There are so many people that we work with, that we see, that we live nearby, or that are in our own family that are struggling mightily right now. We're just asking you, Lord, to give us wisdom, give us opportunities, and give us courage to act in those ways and reaching others. Open our eyes tonight to see the wonderful things you have for us in your word, and we pray in Jesus' name, and amen. All right, so as I said, last week we looked at the questions that Jesus used when he taught, and tonight we're going to look at questions that came to him. And as we look through it and we begin to sort out, we're only going to look at a few under each one of the headings. But as we look at this and we study and we think about it, it would make sense that all kinds of different questions would come to Jesus. And they weren't all sinister when they would come to him, although there were some who were trying to trap him, trick him in some way. Some who thought he was blasphemous and they wanted to just completely get rid of him. There were some who were just really confused and were looking for answers, trying to figure out who this Jesus was and how he was able to do these miracles and what did he mean by all of this teaching that he was doing. And there were some who just came purely seeking information. They wanted to know a particular thing and they would ask Jesus about it. Just in many respects, the same kinds of questions that we get from day to day by all different kinds of people. And so we're going to look at that and see how he dealt with those kinds. The first section that we have in your handout or in your book are questions that were seeking information. And as you would suspect, many people came to Jesus just asking or just seeking information. They didn't have an ulterior motive. They weren't trying to trick him or trap him in some way. But let's consider just a few of these. I've got in your book here. The first one is in Matthew chapter 18 and verse 21. It says, "Then Peter came to him," that is to Jesus, "and said, 'Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times?'" You may have heard, and you know already, that the Jews had a much lesser number of 3, and Peter said in a magnanimous way, should it be 7? Is that what it should be? It seems that he really just wants to know. He needs an answer for this. The second one's in Matthew chapter 24. It says, now as he sat down on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Now, in the context here of Matthew chapter 24, Jesus has been talking about the fall of Jerusalem and all that was going to happen. And they're inquiring now and say, tell us, when is this going to happen? What's it going to be? They really seem to be just looking for information. And the third one that I have listed in your book there is from the Gospel of John, chapter 13 and verse 36. Simon Peter said unto him, Lord, where are you going? When he told them he was going away, well, where are you going? Was their question, his question. We want to go with you. We want to be with you, so where are you going? So these and a lot of others, when they came to Jesus, they just sought specific information. They were often prompted by something that Jesus had said or done, and so that prompted a question from them as to, well, what does this mean? Like we said, he had been teaching about the destruction of Jerusalem, and their question was in Matthew 24, well, when's this going to be? And what's going to be the sign of all of this? How are we going to know? His teaching prompted them to ask questions. So I would ask you as a teacher, when you're teaching, when you're instructing your students, do you teach in such a way that it prompts them to ask questions? We might think, oh no, I've answered all their questions. Well, we shouldn't be that naive to think on any subject that we've answered all of their questions. But do we prompt further questions from people seeking information as we do? I've said many times in the teaching or preaching that I've done for years, when I teach in a class, I really am surprised how seldom somebody will ask a question of me seeking more information. More often than not, what is stated is just a kind of a recycling of information that we already know, or that they already know. And they'll say, well, is this the same as such and such, and isn't this like this, or in another place the Lord said, and it's sometimes, I want to be very careful, not suggesting that it's always wrong. Sometimes it seems to be just I want to show you what I know, and so I bring up something in the class. But it just surprises me how seldom people actually ask questions. Now maybe that's my fault in the way that I'm teaching, and so I'm trying to learn from that as well. So another question that I have regarding this is, do people see you as somebody who has the answer? Because if they don't, they're not necessarily going to ask you a question. They don't think you can answer it, unless they're just trying to embarrass you, or they're trying to put you in your place in some way, which rarely happens, or I've seen rarely, at least for myself. But one of the style, or one of the forms of questions, was just seeking information. The second one, as I've got in your book here, is questions that were asked because they were expressing confusion. They really didn't know what Jesus was talking about, what he meant, or what he was doing, and so they were confused, and that prompted a question. Their own, as I've got here, spiritual ignorance or spiritual blindness was showing up, and so it confused them. The first one is in John chapter 2 and verse 20. Then the Jews said, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it up in 3 days? They didn't understand. And in fact, it goes on to say they didn't understand. Jesus was talking not about the physical buildings of the temple, but he was talking about his own body. That in 3 days it would be torn down, and in 3 days it would be raised back up again. He would resurrect back to life. The next one is in John chapter 3. Nicodemus said unto him, when Jesus told him, you have to be born again. Nicodemus, you can almost see him scratching his head saying, how can a man be born when he's old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? He's trying to figure this out. I'm confused. What do you mean I have to be born again? And then so Jesus taught him a little bit more. Then Nicodemus answered and said, well, how can these things be? I just don't understand. I'm confused. And so how can this be possible? And Jesus goes on and instructs Nicodemus. And then the third one I have is in chapter 4 of the Gospel of John, when Jesus is talking with the woman at the well who's come out from the city of Samaria. It says, the woman of Samaria said unto him, how can this be, or how is this, that you being a Jew ask a drink from me, a Samaritan? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. So she's confused and says, Samaritans and Jews don't get along, and you've asked me for a favor. Why? I don't understand. Why have you done this? As it goes on a little bit, Jesus talked with her some more, and the woman said to him, Sir, after he had told her, you could have asked of me, and I'd have given you living water, she said, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and this well is deep. Where are you going to get this living water? She was confused. So when those came to Jesus with confusion, he further taught them, and as evidenced by those few passages we just looked at. So let's look at your book and the question, how can teachers better create an environment where learners feel comfortable even to ask questions? And that's what I said before. So maybe it's a fault of mine in my teaching in that I don't generate a lot of questions from the class. But what are some things that we can do? I think ask questions of them, especially ones that prompt more thinking or a question back. Ask if they have any questions. Was this clear to you? Are you confused? Is there anything that I need to clear up? Then somebody might raise their hand and say, yeah, I didn't understand what you meant by this. Could you explain it? Or how is this possible? I think as well of being authoritative but not being arrogant will help to generate questions. If the person or the class understands that you have a knowledge, you're authoritative in a sense, but you're not arrogant in that you're a know-it-all, that they would ask the questions possibly of you. And then I would say to answer questions honestly. One of the big mistakes that lots have made is to try to fake their way through an answer. If you don't know the answer to them, just honestly tell them, I don't know, but I'll try to find out. And then go do your research. And so try to teach the class to be inquisitive, to ask questions. So have you ever listened in a class before and sat there and been confused by what the teacher said? Well, surely you all have. For no other reason, some of you have sat in my class, many of you have. So the teacher's taught something and you've been confused by what was said. So here's the question. Did you ask for clarity or not? A lot of times we just don't. I don't know, maybe it's afraid we're afraid to show our ignorance. I don't want to raise my hand and show my ignorance. I don't want to distract the class. I don't want to get off topic, whatever the case is, that we might justify our own thinking. But if you didn't do that, what was the reason for it? Maybe you thought, well, the teacher, he or she, they don't know the answer to this anyway, so there's no reason for me to even ask them. So expressing confusion, trying to generate questions from people. The third area, just so we keep moving on, because there's a lot of different topics in this lesson. Questions asked which express denial in and of themselves. So let me ask this first. It's not in your book, but have you ever asked a question of somebody expressing your own denial? Surely you have, haven't you? You see what I just said? Express my denial. That if you had said, no, I've never done that before. Really? Sure you have. You think about a situation, you ask to somebody, you say, you're not going out this late, are you? And you're expressing denial by this. You're not going to ask her out, are you? Or do you really think you can make a difference? And the question is expressing denial. I don't really think you can, so I'm asking you in a question, do you really think you can make a difference in that situation? But by the tone of my voice and the question, you know that I'm really saying, I don't think you can do anything to make that situation any better. So listen to a couple of these in the Bible. John chapter 4, verse 12. This is, again, the Samaritan woman. She said, "Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and livestock?" Her obvious implication is you're not as great as him. And that's why she asked the question in that denial form. The next one from John chapter 8. "Are you greater than our father Abraham, who is dead, and the prophets are dead? Who do you make yourself out to be?" They asked of Jesus. You see, I don't really think you're all that high. I don't think you're that great. I certainly don't think you're better than Abraham. I don't think you're better than the prophets, is what they're saying to Jesus as they ask this question and express their own denial. In John chapter 9, then one of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said, "Are we blind also?" When Jesus talked about blindness and seeing in a spiritual way. And his obvious answer, obvious implication, of his question is, we're not blind. And so, are you claiming we're blind too? Because we're not, is in essence what he was saying. They were claiming that they were spiritually enlightened. So in each of these situations, Jesus continued teaching. Sometimes he would pose a question to them in response. How do you usually respond if you're asked a question by somebody that expresses doubt? Do you get irritated or do you get frustrated? Do you respond in kind to them and try to throw something back on them, expressing your doubt that they're really sincere in the way they ask? Well, we probably have all done that in a heated situation at one time or another with somebody who's expressed denial in us, that we then turn it back on them. But that's not what Jesus did. Jesus continued to teach. And this next group is kind of similar to that, but it's a little bit more outspoken, because there are some people who came to Jesus and actually challenged him, outright challenged him by the questions that they asked. What we don't have, as we read the words of the Bible, what we don't have is tone of voice. We don't have voice inflection. We don't have posture. We don't know if they've got raised eyebrows, if they've got a smirk on their face, or whatever when they ask these questions. We're not told those things regarding the circumstances. But look at this first one. Mark chapter 2, verse 24. "Now it happened that he," that is Jesus, "went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and as they," that is the disciples who were with him, "as they went, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, 'Look, why do they do what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?'" Now, they're actually challenging Jesus. Now, how might you say that? What tone of voice might you use, and voice inflections? What facial expression might you have if you were going to ask that question because you really were just seeking information? You might be able to ask those same words and say, "Why do they do what's unlawful to do on the Sabbath?" Expecting Jesus then to respond with an answer. Or how might you say that if you're actually challenging Jesus? Now the voice inflection, the facial expressions all may change, and you say, "Look, why do they do what is unlawful to do on the Sabbath?" That's the same question, but one is a challenge, one is seeking information. Look at the next one, John chapter 8 and verse 19. "Then they said unto him, 'Where is your Father?'" Now they could have said, so where is your Father? And they were seeking information to them, from him. But what would it mean if they had a sneer or a raised eyebrow? "Yeah, so where is your Father?" They're expressing doubt. They're challenging Jesus by that very thing. The next one in John 19, "Then Pilate said unto him, 'Are you speaking to me? Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you or the power to release you?'" He's challenging Jesus. "Don't you know who I am? I can put an end to all of this right now. And so, I don't know if you know who I am, but I've got the power to kill you." And so his question is really done in a way that's challenging, because we can tell by the responses and so on. There are a few occasions when Jesus was asked a question that he didn't speak a word. He didn't answer their question. But if we're going to try to put this into our life and be teachers as Jesus taught, Jesus had the ability that we don't have. Jesus had the ability to look in their heart and know whether they're sincere or not in asking. We don't have that ability. So I would say we need to be very careful very limited in just refusing to answer. Sometimes, as Paul said, foolish and ignorant questions refuse. If you know somebody's just trying to cause a problem, somebody's just trying to pick a fight, then don't join in. We've been reading the book of Proverbs the last several weeks, several different times in the Proverbs. It's talked about a fool who just spouts off whatever's on his mind. He just says whatever. But a wise person, they hold their tongue. And that's what I think would be a good point here to recognize. The passage in your book, that's the next question, read Matthew 21 and verse 23. Here's what it says. When Jesus returned to the temple and began teaching, the leading priests and the elders came up to him and they demanded him and said, by what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? And my question was, what was the circumstance? Why did they ask this question? Just a little bit earlier than that, Jesus had cleared the temple. He had turned over tables and chairs and chased them out of there and accused them of being a den of thieves. And so now they kind of got their courage up. And they come back, when Jesus comes back to the temple, they finally come to Jesus and they challenge him and they said, wait a minute, what are you doing? Who gave you this authority? By what authority are you doing this? They're challenging Jesus, saying, who do you think you are? You have no right, is what they're really telling him. You're a nobody. You're not a priest. You don't have authority. You can't do this. But it was done in a question form. And Jesus then goes ahead and deals with that situation in the context there. All right, then the next series or kind of questions are questions that were born out of trickery. You know, some people came to Jesus for no other reason than just to try to entrap him in his words. In John chapter 8, there's a pitiful situation about the woman who was caught in adultery, dragged right up in front of the Bible class, presented to Jesus, and said, okay, what do you say to do? And here it is. Now, Moses in the law commanded us that such, that is this woman, should be stoned. But what do you say? And then it tells us, this they said, testing him that they might have something to accuse him. You see, it's clear from the context that they didn't come seeking information. They weren't really desirous of learning the will of the Lord. They just were coming to try to trap Jesus. I think it's clear from the context they were in this whole situation. It's a setup. It's a giant setup for this woman. They've been in it from the beginning. The man is not present. They just drag her through the street. They try to take care of the situation in a way that's just to trap Jesus. And it's interesting how Jesus solved the situation. He didn't fall for their setup. Jesus didn't ignore their question. So what he did is he put them on the horns of a dilemma and challenged them. And he said, whichever one of you, or he who is without sin, throw the first stone. I think Jesus knew that they were all involved in this plot. They had set it up with the woman. They had dragged the woman out. Remember, they said they caught her in the very act of adultery, right in the very act. And they drag her through the streets and bring her to Jesus just to try to trap him. It's interesting that his answer to them is a question, in essence. Which one of you is innocent in all of this? If you are, then you're the first one to throw a stone at her. Question solved, they leave. All of them, except the woman. On another occasion in Matthew chapter 19, the Pharisees said to Jesus, they came to him testing him, and they said, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? You see, they're not really trying to find an answer. They're not looking for advice. They're not looking for God's counsel. They're trying to trap Jesus. And so they create a hypothetical situation, as it goes on to explain. And what did they do with that? Jesus points out that your situation doesn't work. You don't understand, he said. There's no marriage or given marriage in heaven. So did their ploy work? No, it didn't work. Jesus was able to see through that. The next segment or questions that were asked expressing surprise. In John chapter 1 verse 48, Nathanael, who had been sitting under a fig tree and was brought to Jesus, and Jesus said, behold, an Israelite in whom there is no guile. And Nathanael, it said to him, how do you know me? his question expresses surprise. How do you know me? Jesus said, oh, before you ever were sitting over there, I knew who you were. I know you. The other one, in John chapter 13 and verse 6, then Jesus, on that occasion when he was washing the apostles' feet, he came to Simon Peter, and Simon Peter said, Lord, are you washing my feet? He's just surprised. This is not how it should be. I should be washing your feet. Are you going to wash my feet? And Peter said, I don't want anything to do with it. And Jesus said, well, if you don't, then you don't have anything to do with me. And Peter says, wash my head, my hands, wash me all over, in essence. I want to be all in. The next one was in Luke chapter 24. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to him, are you the only stranger in Jerusalem? And you don't know the things which have happened here these days? This is after Jesus is resurrected. They don't know this is Jesus. These are dejected disciples walking back home. And he says, hey, what are y'all talking about? Apparently Jesus was born in South Bethlehem. He said, y'all. So what are y'all talking about? And he says, are you the only person that, I'm so surprised you don't know what we're talking about. Are you the only person around here that hasn't heard? And Jesus then has this carry-on conversation with them. And he teaches them even some more as he finally travels with them a little bit further. The last section, or last kind of questions that I have, are questions that express anxiety. In Luke chapter 2 and verse 48, so when they saw him, they were amazed, and his mother said unto him, Son, why have you done this to us? Look, your father and I have sought you anxiously. Of course, this is the occasion when Jesus was the young boy who got left behind or stayed behind at the temple, and his parents had made their way toward home, 3 days journey to come back and find, and look, Jesus is not with us. They come back and find him. And the mother says unto him, just expressing her anxiety, Son, why have you done this to us? Don't you know we'd be concerned? And in Matthew chapter 28, when he had come to the other side of the country of the Gerasenes, there met him 2 demon-possessed men, coming out of the tombs exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. And suddenly they cried out, saying, what have we to do with you, Jesus, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before our time? These demons are filled with anxiety, and they address Jesus. Wait a minute. Are you going to punish us, or what's going to happen? Is their great concern. But in answering these questions, Jesus asked a question or comforted them or performed a miracle or taught them even more as to what they needed to know. So I asked this last question here, Mark chapter 4 and verse 38. What anxiety were the apostles expressing when they came and asked Jesus what they did in Mark chapter 4? Well, it's clear that they thought they were going to drown. This storm that had come up, and the boat, the way it was just rocking back and forth on the waves and covered over with water, they thought they were going to drown. And they come to Jesus in the sense of, don't you care? How in the world can you be sleeping? Don't you care what we're going through, what we're experiencing right now? They're filled with anxiety over that, and so they ask a question of Jesus. Now, we can go through a lot of different questions under each of these headings, maybe even some more that you've thought of as we've gone through it. But let me give you a few suggestions. Just cover these at the end of your lesson. Is strive to create an atmosphere where students feel comfortable to ask a question. Try to teach in such a way that the students feel enough connectivity to you, the teacher, that they feel like they can ask a question. They can raise their hand in the class, or they can come to you afterwards and say, what did you mean by this? I don't understand. Trying to create an atmosphere. The second one is to be open and try to thoughtfully answer questions. If there's a thought question that comes up, fact questions are different. Facts are facts. If it's a thought question, or how would you consider this, try to be thoughtful and open about how you'd answer. Don't just try to give them a canned response, but I'm really challenged by that myself, but here's what I've tried to do, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes I failed. you're candid and honest. Honestly admit if you don't know the answer. If the question comes up and you don't know, don't try to fake it. Like I said before, just tell them, I don't know. I haven't ever thought of that, or I've never considered that, or I don't have an answer for you now. But I'll tell you what, I'll study it this week and I'll get back with you and I'll bring you an answer as best I can. And then, like we had in lesson number 9 last week, teach them how to ask questions. Give them prompts that help them to ask questions, or ask questions to get them to ask questions. That you'd say, was that clear to you? Or what was unclear? And somebody could say, well, what did you mean when you said this or that or whatever? And do your best to respond to all of their questions. Maybe you're not able to cover every question in every class, but do your best to try to do that. Okay, that wraps it up for this evening. This is lesson number 10. Next week we'll go into lesson number 11. I believe we'll still be recording and presenting it that way, that we won't be back for Wednesday nights. But as I said, we're planning to be back for Sunday unless something comes up. Planning to be back Sunday. We'll have an inside-outside service. Chairs will be set up under the driveway, and chairs will be set up in the foyer, and we'll be together somewhat in that regard, and all be able to, at either 9 or 10:30, join in our worship in person collectively. Hopefully the auditorium will be soon finished, and we'll be able to get back in there and spread out as we have in the past. But really, hopefully, this virus and the challenges with that will go away soon enough that we don't have to worry about all of those concerns. Thanks for joining me tonight and being with me in this study. If you have questions, I certainly would encourage you to either post them here or send me a text, send me an email, give me a phone call. Let me know what questions you have, and I'll try as best I can to get a response and an answer for you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.